The president of Indonesia visits the site of the country's deadly earthquake. Coronavirus and Catholic schools. Analysis of the lockdown policies and how they affected the faithful. And healthcare in Africa. Why the Holy Father is praising one organization for its work on the front lines. These stories and more tonight.
From Ewtn, the Global Catholic Network, this is Ewtn News Nightly.
Thank you for being with us on this feast of St. Cecilia. Our top story tonight, a bipartisan bill making it possible for pregnant women to keep working is just a step away from congressional approval. The measure would prevent expecting mothers from having to leave their jobs by allowing simple workplace accommodations. And the bill has the approval of the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales joins us now with the latest. Eric?
Good evening, Tracy. You know, the measure is called the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. It was approved in the House earlier with more than 300 votes. It's now currently in the Senate. Its chief sponsor, Republican Senator Bill Cassidy from Louisiana, who is a medical doctor. He tells me that it's close to getting the necessary votes.
It's modeled after a police officer in Louisville, like 8 months pregnant, and she couldn't stand because she was 8 months pregnant, but by department regulations, they were not allowed to give her a stool to sit on.
Louisiana Senator Bill Cassidy is the chief author of the bill. He tells me the bill protects employers from lawsuits by other workers who may want accommodations of their own. Many Democrats are also on board, like Senator Jean Shaheen of New Hampshire, one of the co-sponsors of the bill. In a statement, she said the proposal prohibits employers from denying jobs to women based on their need for reasonable accommodations. Quote, no expected mother should ever face barriers that prevent her from fully participating in the workplace and providing for herself and her family. I'm very pleased with this bipartisan bill, which would help prevent pregnancy discrimination. Senator Cassidy tells me the bill also has a lot of support from outside groups.
It is patterned after the Disability for Americans Act, but would allow this Disabled Americans Act, which would allow the employer to give a reasonable accommodation. They don't get sued if they don't, but it's reasonable, they're allowed. The Catholic bishops support, the U.S. Chamber supports, and of course every woman supports.
Even the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops wrote to Congress supporting the bill. Quote, the bill will make the workplace a safer environment for nursing mothers, pregnant women, and their unborn children. There really is an unspoken benefit to all of this when you allow pregnant women necessary accommodations in order to be able to do their job. It saves more unborn lives, and this way they don't have to choose between a career and possibly having a family. Now, the bill is currently on the Senate calendar for consideration. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, Ewtn News Nightly.
Another Catholic parish in the United States has become the target of vandalism. This time it is St. Peter's Parish in Kenosha, Wisconsin. A prayer shrine outside of the church was tagged by graffiti on Sunday night. A tall mosaic image of Jesus, the Divine Mercy, was defaced with green spray paint. Police are investigating. While many doctors agree COVID-19 poses very little risk to children, the pandemic lockdown policies, however, are another story. A recent report studying U.S. public school students in 4th and 8th grades shows a near free fall in post-pandemic test scores in math and reading. But that was not the case in the nation's Catholic schools. Test scores, by and large, went up, as did enrollment. This as many Catholic schools operate at a deficit. So, what can be done to make Catholic education both sustainable and available for future generations? And joining us tonight with his insights is Tommy Schultz, CEO of the American Federation for Children. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on. We appreciate a lot to unpack here. But first, I want to start with enrollment in Catholic schools. As mentioned, numbers are up. However, that does not seem to equate financial stability. In fact, many Catholic schools operate in the red. What can you report? And why is this the case?
Yeah, look, I think the big picture with Catholic education and the dominant storyline for the past 20, 30 years has been declining enrollment, financial instability. On average, I think we were closing about 200 Catholic schools per year, partly because of the business model from the 1960s, which largely relied upon free labor from the clergy, oftentimes financial backing from the diocese or from local contributors. The business model didn't make sense. And you can see the disparity when public schools on average are spending about $16,000 per student per year in K through 12, whereas Catholic schools are only charging tuition roughly at $5,800. You could just see that there's kind of financial turbulence there. But the way to sustain things into the future, and where we're seeing state by state, wherever they're passing major school choice policies, that's really giving Catholic schools a lot of financial stability. And that would help the country writ large, as we're seeing from some of these test scores, where on average across the country, Catholic school students are 1.5 to 2 grade levels ahead of their public school peers. So these are big trends, and I'm excited to talk further about it.
Yeah, and I know that you're a big advocate for school choice. Talk to us more about that, how it works, especially in states like Florida, which seems to be leading in that effort.
Yeah, look, Florida and Arizona, two of the biggest states when it comes to school choice. By and large, every single family in Arizona now can fully control roughly $7,000 for their child's education. So they can use that for private school tuition, homeschooling, you name it, any approved educational expense. Families are now able to control that in Arizona. In Florida, roughly 150,000 students are using what's called a tax credit scholarship to be able to attend a private school. 300,000 are attending charter schools. They're probably on the precipice of expanding in the way that Arizona did. These are really big opportunities for other states to really follow their lead and to say, look, every family should have the freedom to choose the best education for their sons and daughters, especially, as I said, when we're spending roughly $16,000 per student in K through 12 writ large in our public schools. Why can't families control that for their own sons and daughters? Why is it only that families that have the means to be able to send their child to a private school, they're only afforded that right because of our old archaic system that we built in K through 12, that basically we started in the 1850s, set it on autopilot and said, look, unless you live in the right zip code, you're not going to get access to a great school, or unless you live in a state where you have school choice programs. That's a big disparity, and that's where school choice can really level the playing field for a lot of families.
Yeah, I mean, to me, school choice seems kind of like a no-brainer, but there are people who are against it. What's their argument?
Well, I think they're tethered to the old school teacher unions talking points, which is that they fundamentally just believe in an old and different system when it comes to public education. And it really just comes down to power and control. I mean, the teachers unions, they are a $3 billion per year revenue operation. And so they want to do everything they can to fully control every aspect of our education system. Whereas school choice, where you're funding the student and not the system, that fundamentally puts parents in charge. And that's where I think actually, as you're seeing over the past couple of years, all of the wars and all of the outrage around curriculum and pedagogy, what we're doing in our classrooms, much of this would be alleviated if families were actually in charge, because right now it's just a one-size-fits-all system, which is rather a one-size-fits-none system, right? I mean, that's kind of the fundamental distinction, that some people want to keep it the way it is, the status quo. We want to move in a direction that funds the students rather than the system, so that parents are ultimately in charge. Almost
out of time, but do you see school choice, do you see it gaining more traction, especially, in the wake of lockdowns and the post-pandemic grade reports and all of this, so-called woke agenda that we're seeing in schools as well?
No, I think the next few years, it's going to be the biggest absolute expansion in terms of number of students getting access to private schools, access to charter schools, access to homeschooling with state funding, because ultimately parents are wanting this. We do polling every year that shows 70% of parents want to send their kids to a school that is not a government-run public school. And so now we're kind of meeting the moment with, like you said, everything that's happened during the pandemic, from the shutdowns to the curriculum. Parents are finally outraged enough to take it to the ballot box and to take it to their state legislators to say, give us school choice. Let us control our child's education dollars. And even just this year alone in Arizona, biggest expansion in school choice in American history. I think a lot more dominoes are set to fall in the years to come.
All right, we're going to leave it right there. Tommy, thank you so much for coming on. Great to get your insights.
Thanks for having me.
Well, Dr. Anthony Fauci says that he never imagined so many Americans would lose their lives during the COVID-19 pandemic.
So when I see people in this country, because of the divisiveness in our country, of not getting vaccinated for reasons that have nothing to do with public health, but have to do because of divisiveness and ideological differences, as a physician, it pains me, because I don't want to see anybody get infected. I don't want to see anybody hospitalized, and I don't want to see anybody die from COVID.
So we questioned the White House about vaccine mandates and whether it's fair for people to lose their jobs or get kicked out of the military over those mandates.
The military decides what it needs to have a healthy fighting force. This is a decision up to our military leaders. Individual employers can make these decisions. So we've had a long history of this, of individual local decisions on these kinds of issues, and I think that is completely appropriate.
Well, he says if Americans get their updated vaccines and treated if they get a breakthrough infection, then it would prevent nearly every COVID death in the country. And we still have a lot more to come here on EWTN News Nightly, including the latest from Hong Kong, where there are new developments regarding a former pro-democracy newspaper and how one of China's neighbors is praised for its efforts to preserve religious liberty.
Hi, I'm Doug Keck, inviting you to a special EWTN bookmark with the one and only Raymond Arroyo, author of The Wise Men Who Found Christmas.
Politics, ambition, pain, those things can keep you from seeing, even looking for Christmas. These guys, not only did they feel that there was something there, they went out and took the risk to find it.
Next time on Bookmark.
Padre Pio was born in Italy in 1887, and from a very young age he was able to see visions of guardian angels, of Mary, and of Jesus. At the age of 15, he became a Franciscan friar and took the name Brother Pio. One day, while he was hearing confessions, he began to feel pain in his hands, and that's when his stigmata developed. He was known for his charity, piety, and inspirational preaching. In 1947, a young priest visited Padre Pio, and Padre Pio told him that he would rise to the highest post in the church. That young priest later became Pope John Paul II. Padre Pio died on September 23, 1968, and in June of 2002, St. John Paul canonized him as a saint. He's the patron saint of civil defense volunteers and adolescents. Life can get so crazy and busy sometimes, and we can become really anxious and worried about the future. Padre Pio reminds us to pray, hope, and don't worry. Worry is useless, God is merciful, and will hear your prayer.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Amen.
Thanks for staying with us. Malta's majority Labour Party wants to decriminalize abortion. The measure would allow abortion if the mother's life or health would be at risk. The majority Catholic country currently prohibits all abortions. The death toll continues to rise following the deadly earthquake in Indonesia, and as rescue teams continue their work, the country's president paid a visit.
Duka cita yang mendalam, bela sungkawa.
The leader expressed his condolences to those impacted. Meantime, it is estimated now more than 260 people have died, with dozens more still missing as a result of the 5.6 magnitude quake. A half a dozen members of a now defunct pro-democracy newspaper in Hong Kong have entered guilty pleas in a national security law case. The six were arrested more than a year ago. Today, they admitted to lesser charges of conspiring with the newspaper's Catholic founder Jimmy Lai during anti-government protests back in 2019. They still face life in prison under the Beijing-backed security law. Trial for Jimmy Lai is set to begin early next month. A group of international economists paint a bleak forecast for next year.
Global growth is slowing down, continues to slow down, and confidence has weakened. Inflation has become broad-based and persistent, and in response, central banks have been raising policy rates, and global financial conditions have tightened significantly.
The outlook comes from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. The Paris-based group anticipates growth just over 2% in 2023. That is down 4% from 2 years ago. High praise for the country of Taiwan for its efforts to preserve religious liberty. This from religious freedom activists who call the country a bright spot in a world where religious freedom is deteriorating. President of the International Religious Freedom Secretariat, Nadine Menza, returned from Taiwan earlier this month, and she joins us tonight with more. Nadine, great to be with you as always.
Thank you.
I know you describe a robust democracy and, as we just mentioned, remarkable conditions for religious freedom. Can you tell us more about your impressions?
Yes, I mean, it's a place where people accept each other with deep theological differences. So we're not talking about tolerance here. Tolerance is putting up with something you don't like, and they actually really embrace each other. And they've developed this culture of religious freedom that is in stark contrast to the Chinese Communist Party that is committing genocide, of course, against the Uyghur Muslims, persecuting Christians, Tibetans, Falun Gong, and others. But what we're seeing in Taiwan that, has overcome occupation and authoritarian rule to develop this really vibrant, robust democracy that prioritizes religious freedom in a really beautiful way. Such a beautiful place. Physically, the people are welcoming, and the way that they care for one another and their religious freedom it's really stunning. It's so impressive to see in person.
Yeah, and I know in a recent article you mentioned the ease in which different religious communities interact with each other in Taiwan. Can you tell us more about this culture of respect for people with different beliefs?
Yeah, it was so interesting that the Catholic Church we were visiting, there was a Buddhist nun that was weeding his garden. They just have this really close relationship. You would see this large Buddhist humanitarian organization that rebuilds houses of worship immediately upon doing humanitarian work around the world, and even a Islamic boarding school. And so you see all of this really beautiful representing one another. And I know that the Presbyterian Church of Taiwan has played a key role in really fighting for democracy, standing up for democracy. And even though Christians and Protestants are like 5.5% of the population, Catholics like 1.3%, these are small amounts, but they're thanked for the role they played in that and really respected. And so you have this beautiful culture that we can learn from. How did it move from authoritarian to this? How did they prioritize religious freedom and create a society where everyone is accepted? And we can learn from this and hopefully spread this in other places. And it's, like I said, such a stark contrast to China. And it's a threat to China. Freedom, Taiwan in and of itself, of course, is not a threat to China, but their freedom's a threat.
Yeah, and I know you also mentioned something else I want to touch on is that Taiwan really has won the respect of religious freedom advocates on a global level. What other nations have their eye on Taiwan as a model for their own blueprints? What do you think?
Well, that's a really good question. And I don't know if countries look at other countries that way, which is why it's important for us to be able to learn from countries like Taiwan and other places that are bright spots for religious freedom, and be able to share those kinds of information, what they do in education, how they bring religious communities together. What was it about building a democracy that brought together all the different faiths? And that was one of the reasons I visited, because I wanted to understand. I asked a lot of questions. What was it like before it moved out of authoritarian rule? How it all played out. And those are the kind of things I think we haven't researched enough that would be really good for the U.S. and for those of us who value religious freedom to be able to share to those countries that are working. And there are several countries around the world right now working to improve their conditions, and they could really use that kind of information.
Absolutely. And there's so many bright spots in Taiwan, but I'm wondering, what's your biggest concern for the country?
It really is this threat. The Chinese Defense Minister, Wei Feng, just told the U.S. Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, that Taiwan is at the core of Chinese core interests and was a red line that must not be crossed. He said, literally to the Secretary of Defense, the resolution of Taiwan is a matter for the Chinese people. No external force has the right to interfere. So China is definitely drawing a red line. And of course, the U.S. has been deliberate, and had really, they call it like a deliberate ambiguity, policy of deliberate ambiguity with Taiwan as a way to not push the needle or the envelope in that could cause an invasion, but at the same time giving the people of Taiwan the opportunity to make decisions for themselves. So it's a really difficult line to walk, and it's super important that the U.S. gets this right.
And Nadine, before I let you go, I'm curious, what else is on your radar? What else are you following?
Well, we're following another similar situation. A bright spot, northeast Syria has the best religious freedom conditions in the Middle East, where Christians, Yazidis, others can all participate in government, where women are half the leaders. And Turkey is threatening to invade, has been bombing, just relentless, killed 15, I believe it's up to 15 now, civilians, bombed hospitals, in fact, just bombed the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS and the Syrian Democratic Forces base. So there are U.S. forces on that base, killing some anti-terrorist specialists. That all they do on that base is work to defeat ISIS. So last time Turkey invaded northeast Syria and took part of the land, they committed atrocities that were documented by Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, lots of documentation, where they targeted Christians, Yazidis, Kurdish, especially women, with rape, kidnapping, killing, destroyed religious sites, destroyed churches, destroyed Yazidi shrines. So we would expect the same sort of conditions if Turkey invades again. It's so important that the U.S. stand up against that.
Absolutely. And Nadine, thank you so much for speaking to us about all of this. We appreciate it. Great to get your insights as always.
Thanks for having me.
Up next on EWTN News Nightly, bonds of friendship. Plus, Pope Francis recognizes an organization that provides health care to the needy in Africa.
My name is Archbishop Timothy Broglio. I'm the Archbishop for the Military Services. And today on Faith Matters, we're going to talk about the Holy Eucharist, which is, as you know, the source and summit of our lives as Catholics. It is that moment when we gather as a community to celebrate and be present at the one unique sacrifice of Jesus Christ when he suffered, died, and gave his life for us, and provided for us the opportunity to continue to be nourished so that we can be strengthened by the gift of his body and blood, so that he can come into us. And unlike normal food, he transforms us rather than us transforming what we receive. It is a moment then of participation. It is also a moment when the whole church is gathered. The church triumphant in heaven, the church on earth, and when we pray for the dead, they are also present in this one act of sacrificial love when we are joined to the cross and receive the nourishment for our lives. That's why it is so important that we gather at least once a week to celebrate the Eucharist together as a community of faith.
We are back tonight. Pope Francis says Jews and Christians can pave the way for peace. The Holy Father made those remarks today while meeting with members of the World Jewish Congress at the Vatican. Pope Francis adds that our common religious heritage should be an incentive to act together. Pope Francis praises the work of an Italian Catholic organization that is providing health care in Africa.
Perché Africa non va sfruttata, va promossa.
Meeting the members of the association late last week, the Holy Father urged them to continue giving a voice to those in Africa. Established in 1950, the organization includes almost 3,000 members and nearly 24 hospitals in Africa alone. Joining us now from Italy is Andrea Azzori, head of international relations at QUAM, Doctors with Africa. Andrea, great to be with you today. Can you tell us more about the audience with the Pope and what he said to you in his speech?
Oh, hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. Yes, the audience was an incredible moment for us, and we love the fact that Pope Francis put at the center the African continent. He said clearly that the African continent should be not exploited, but we should invest, and especially invest in the human capital, in the young people that every day are seeking opportunity to improve their lives, improving for developing and make grow their community and find also new solution for the big challenges the continent is facing at the moment. So I think it was a privilege to have Pope Francis say that Doctors with Africa QAM contribute to this young movement in Africa, is contributing to saving life for women and children that are in danger or because of epidemics or because of the current situation on the nutrition and food insecurity, but at the end of the day, really focusing on the human capital of this big continent and the great opportunity that the continent has for the future.
And Andrea, for those who aren't familiar with your organization, can you tell us a little bit more about it and your work in Africa?
Oh, yes. Doctors with Africa QAM is an international organization that focuses on the strengthening of local health facilities, local health systems that are providing essential services to the most vulnerable. We work with permanent offices in Africa in 8 countries: Sierra Leone, South Sudan, Central African Republic, Ethiopia, Uganda, Tanzania, Mozambique, and Angola. We always work with a partnership with local government, communities, FPOs, and civil society, and we try to together find a solution to the challenges these communities are facing. Challenges like the difficulty in accessing healthcare, especially for women and children, difficulties in finding quality healthcare, or to find appropriate training and training on the job of health professionals in Africa. We've been doing this since 1950. We've been founded in 1950. It's more than 70 years. And in that day, with Pope Francis, we also launched a new project that will include more countries, more FPO, reaching up to 20 African countries in this huge continent of Africa.
I'm curious, what are currently the biggest health issues in Africa? And also, how did the pandemic affect the populations?
Well, we face many challenges. The first of all, there's been a shift in the epidemiology of the continent. So we're still facing diseases like HIV, malaria, tuberculosis, and malnutrition. At the same time, we have issues like chronic disease, like diabetes and hypertension, because the population is growing, the population is getting older, and also there is a problem with the diet and the lifestyle of many, especially the cities in Africa. So there is this problem of a double burden of disease in the continent. And also we are coming out of 2 years of pandemic. We heard also on Saturday when we sent a speech to Pope Francis and the audience, where the mortality from COVID-19 maybe has not been as high as in the US or the Europe, but has left many gaps in the services. What I mean is that vaccination campaign has been suspended, so we are now seeing measles coming back in Africa. Most of the market, the local market, has been stopped for a while, and we are seeing raising prices in food commodities and in anything that is related to the local production of food. So we're coming out of 2 years of pandemic with some issue that been definitely getting worse in terms of the condition of the community. And then we had the war in Ukraine. It is also creating another problem, especially with inflation and the raising of staple and food prices in Africa.
Well, Andrea, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
And we thank you for watching tonight. Remember, you can follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. Good night, and God bless.
Thank you.